Good afternoon and welcome to UX and Coffee. I'm Jen Romano, excited to talk to you today about strategies to influence UX. One of my favorite topics to talk about because a lot of people need help in this area. And it's not enough to just do good UX work, UX research and design and content. You would hope it's enough because you've been training and you've been practicing and you've held a number of roles. And now here you are cranking out excellent UX work. But it's not enough. It's not enough to just produce good work. It's kind of like a second job. Other things that you need to think about in order to influence UX in your organization or with your clients. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Got my coffee. I'm well caffeinated today. This is it's 3 o'clock and I'm maybe about halfway through. I didn't fill this whole massive cup, by the way. Maybe only like that much was in there. And I'm about halfway through that. I usually don't have coffee this late in the day, not because it affects my sleep or anything like that. I'm actually one of those people that I can have coffee after dinner and I sleep just fine. But oftentimes my coffee will last all day and it's kind of like a slow drip. But here I am, nice and caffeinated and continuing with my energy, with my juice. All right, so let's jump in and discuss strategies to influence UX. So the first thing to think about that is really, really important is building relationships. So we talk a lot about stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement, and these are really, really important in terms of building relationships and influencing UX. 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay, so these are really, really important in terms of influencing UX. If you are not building relationships and managing those relationships with your stakeholders, then the likelihood of influencing UX is smaller. It's lower because managing those relationships with your stakeholders, with the PMs, with VPs, with other executives in a company, with your clients, with those super senior level people that you are working with. Maintaining those relationships, building those relationships builds trust. Okay, so we're building relationships in a classic way, just getting to know each other as humans outside of our jobs, right? Like we're building those relationships. But more important, arguably more important, is the work relationship that you're building. Understanding what they're working on, understanding what is important to them, understanding what is top of mind to them. And then in reverse, sharing how we do research, sharing the impact of our work and the different methods we use. Hang on just 1 second. All right, sorry about that, folks. Okay, where were we? Okay, building relationships. So understanding what they are working on, understanding what's top of mind to them, understanding what is really important to them helps you do your job better. So this brings me to my second point. It's learning the business problems. So all too often we find that, sorry, I have some things going on here today in my house. All too often we find that people are conducting research and it happens in isolation. It's okay. And that's not good. What we want instead is to conduct our research and it maps to business problems. If our research is occurring in isolation, if our research is not aligned to business problems, then it may just sit on a shelf. And that is the worst thing that can happen. That is the worst thing that can happen. I see this happen all too often where really good research is taking place. And what I mean by that is like the methods we're using, the questions we're asking, how we're analyzing our findings, how we're sharing our findings. These things all may be good and well, but if they don't align to business problems, then those stakeholders that you've been building relationships with, they may not care about your work. I've heard this happen. I've heard this before from stakeholders like, wow, that was really great. That was really good research, but we didn't learn anything new. Or really great research, but that's not aligned with some of the things that we're working on right now at a business level. So it's different from the UX research team. It's different from the UX team, the UX design team. It's at a business level. What are the important things that are taking place? What is the business direction? Is the company going in a certain direction? You want to know those things. And the way to know those is by building those relationships, staying aligned with the business. So you've got your stakeholders that you're aligning with and getting to know and building relationships with. You've got meetings. There are often like town hall meetings, things like that, right? So go to those things. Put that on your calendar. Go to those things. Some of these companies have these things weekly, right? Sometimes it's more often because you might have the company level one, you might have the team level one, and you want to go to those things. Make those a priority. That is an opportunity for you to learn more about the business, to learn more about the business problems, to learn about your stakeholders, things that are top of mind to them. And then you get to align your work to match the business objectives, the team objectives, the company objectives, the VP's objectives, right? Like when we're employed by companies, remember that while our ideas are very useful, and that is why you've been hired, remember that we are working to improve or to build products for a company. So what you don't want to do is go off on your own, have your own ideas, produce some research or produce some designs or whatever it is you're producing, and they're not matching what the business owner, the founder, the CEO, the VP, whomever you're reporting to, you want to make sure your work matches theirs. Because if you're conducting great work and it's not matching to theirs, it probably won't get used. And that is the worst thing you could possibly do. All right. So what happens now when those stakeholders, these super senior level people, what happens when they say, well, you only talk to 5 people? Well, you only talk to 100 people. What do we do when that is the case? Now, many of us have experienced this before as researchers, and we may know that we don't need a large sample to detect issues. We may know that we don't need thousands of people to know that we have a usability problem, because we can simply see, even with a handful of people, that people can't use something, right? That people are confused about something. We know we have a problem. We know as researchers that we don't need a large sample. But there are a lot of people that we work with who don't know that. They don't know UX research. They don't know our business. They don't know how we do things and why only, for example, 5 is enough participants to detect issues. So 2 things. 1, educate over and over and over again. Any opportunity you have, any presentation you have is an opportunity to educate. Now, I'm not saying that in your findings presentation that you're going to spend a half hour educating the room about what UX research is and what methods we use. Absolutely not. But maybe a little tiny piece of that. When you talk about the methods you use and how many people you spoke to, you can share why your sample size was sufficient. In addition to the sample size, you can educate about all the prior research that was before that one study. So when somebody says you only talk to 5 people, in this study, we only spoke to 5 people. We don't need more than 5 people to see this is an issue. Let me show you, right? And you can actually show recordings and use data you have to be impactful and show why you know there's problems. You can say, we don't need 5 people to know this is an issue. And in addition, recall that last week, last month, last year, we did this study, and we found this same problem, right? So use that data. Your studies should not be occurring, and you shouldn't be sharing those findings in isolation. Usually we have data that precedes that particular study. Sometimes we don't. If you're the very first researcher and you're conducting the very first study, obviously we don't have that. But oftentimes we do have that. So use that. When you're sharing findings, you don't have to start from zero. You don't have to only talk about the current project that you're reporting on. Obviously, that's going to be the bulk of your time in your findings presentation. But don't forget to share that there is research prior that was consistent with this. By the way, sometimes that's external research. Sometimes there's publicly available data that shows similar things at other organizations. Sometimes there's articles and published pieces that you can use when you're sharing your findings. But also, more importantly, and maybe more impactful for many people in the room will be data from prior research at your company or from your product. All too often, I see research presentations that only discuss the current study. And you have to remember, there may be people in the room who are new to the company, who are new to the team, who this is their first interaction with data about this product. They don't know about all the past work. Remind them. There may be people in the room who know about the past work, but they're busy and they don't remember. Remind them. There may be people who remember like a gist of past work, but they don't know that you've seen this over and over and over and over. Maybe what will come to mind for them is one study or a handful of participants. So do your job in terms of presenting findings. Do that really well. Bring in that past data and share that with your new data. Sometimes we do need more data. Sometimes, let's say you are that first researcher on the team and there is no prior data. That's okay. We need more data. Maybe you only need 5 participants, but you've got super senior level people in the room who don't buy it, they don't understand, and you need more data. I say collect more data. To me, fighting the fight and saying that we don't need more data and having all the citations, if people still aren't believing you, then that's okay. Just get more data. It won't hurt you to have more data, even if you know you don't need it, but it certainly won't hurt you to have more data. So collect more data. When you collect more data, this is where different methods come in. So what you don't want to do is go out and collect another 5 participants using the exact same data, the exact same moderator's guide. Now instead of 5, you have 10, because they'll just come back to you and say, well, you only spoke to 10 people. So what you want to do is use different methods. You want to talk to different user groups, if that makes sense, if that's applicable to your product. That may mean a mixed methods approach where you're combining qual and quant. This is the best approach when somebody is complaining about sample size. Because when we bring in a survey, when we can do some quantitative analyses with larger samples, that's really profound, especially when we're among quanti folks like engineers and quanti folks, right? People who numbers speak to them. And oftentimes we have this with super senior level people, again, who don't understand that you don't need a large sample to detect issues. So we may add a survey to our small sample qualitative research study. We may add remote unmoderated usability testing. We may add a different method. So depending on what you have learned, maybe adding a diary study makes sense. If you want to show that there is some issue that persists over time, that there is this issue that every single time people log in, they have this problem, something like that, then a diary study makes sense. So think about the method that you want to add in order to increase your sample size, in order to gain data. It's not as simple as just, like I said, adding another 5 people to your existing study or existing methodology that you used. So think about what you need, what would make it more powerful, and then conduct another study. Now, when you go back and present, now you're going to remember also there's other data that you're going to add to this. So now when you go back and present, you've got your small sample study, usability study. You've got your larger quant study. Now you've remembered there's some other existing work in the company that is consistent, and you're going to bring that in. Now, when you go back and you share those findings, it's a lot more powerful. Okay, because now you have a larger sample. You've got more user groups. Make sure you're talking to different users, different participants as you're adding data. You don't want to go back to the same 5 participants and just ask them more questions, right? We want more people in the room, more behavior, more opinions in the room. Because then when all these align, it's hard to ignore. It's hard to say, you know, you only spoke to 5 people, because now you've actually spoken to a lot more, and the findings are all consistent, pointing in the same direction. What else? Talking about stakeholders. Another thing to do with stakeholders is to make them a part of your team. Now, they're all busy. Everybody's busy. We all have our roles in our companies and on our teams. Everybody's busy. So you can't expect everyone to want to attend every single UX research session live. But you can invite them, number one. So you're communicating a lot over and over about what you're up to, what's in the pipeline, what you've already done. You're communicating, hey, folks, we have a study coming up next week. We have a study coming up in 2 weeks. You're communicating that. You're inviting them. You could put it on their calendar. Make it super easy to access. If you're live in person, you're telling them exactly where it is. You're telling them what you expect of them in person. In person works best if it's in a different room. You don't want a whole bunch of people in the same room, which can interfere with your data collection. But inviting them, they're sitting in another room. You're telling them when the session is going to begin, that they'll be in another room, whatever. You're setting them up for success to be observers. But also these days, it's so easy to join remotely. Whether or not you're in person with your participant is irrelevant, because you can stream your session. You're in person with your participant, or you're remote, just as I am with you right now. I can easily share a link to other people who can join. So you can make it super, super easy. You're inviting them, you're reminding them, you're making it super easy for them to join. Now, again, people are busy. Not everybody's going to be able to join live, but you can share after the fact. So day of, you can share little tidbits about what you learned. At the end of all data collection, at the end of the week, you can share tidbits about what you've learned. You can send links to the recordings so people can watch them on their own time. You can send links to compilations. So you are let's say you had 10 sessions, you're taking those 10 sessions, you're grabbing pieces from each of them, you're making one compilation, and that's what you send to your stakeholders. I have some colleagues who've done podcasts. So basically, you're just taking the audio of, again, the whole session or pieces of it, and you're sending people audio links. Imagine the power of that. People can now listen to the audio while they're doing something else, while they're driving, while they're making dinner, while they're getting ready in the morning, right? Their morning routine can be to listen to UX research findings while they're getting ready, right? You're making it super easy for them to be part of your research. This reminds me of another point. You know, when we are designing, creating, improving, making recommendations to improve products, we think about our end users, the users of our products. And what I want you to think about is, who is the user of your product? And in this case, the product is the research findings. Who is your user? Who are your users? And if there are different types of users, like the one who is going to listen to the podcast while they're getting ready in the morning, and the one who wants to see all the charts and the details, and the one who wants the high level summary, just tell me in 2 sentences, right? Who are your users of your information, and how do you best give them the information, right? How do you make your findings usable for your users? So really think about that. Sometimes it does mean we are producing different reports, but what I'm sharing here about inviting them to the live sessions, sending them recordings of the entire session, sending them the audio of the entire session, those really don't involve much, right? It's just sending things. When you get into making compilations and things like that, obviously it's a little bit more time, but if you have the time, if you can make the time, figure out a fast way to do that kind of thing, I highly recommend it, because now you're making your product, your report, your findings usable for your users, which means they will actually use it, which is exactly what you want. The worst thing to do, I'll say this again and again, is to conduct research. It could be the best research ever, the best methods, you're the best moderator in the world. The worst thing you can do is to do that research and then nobody consumes it. Nobody's listening, nobody's watching, nobody's reading. That is the worst thing that can happen. So make it easy for your stakeholders to be part of the team and share those findings in ways that resonate with them. I mentioned earlier to educate again and again and again. Don't underestimate that. There are lots of times during a research process when you can educate. Starting with kickoff meeting, right? We're educating about what UX research is and what kind of methods we use. And you're listening to the questions your team has and you're saying, oh, well, we could use this method, we could use that. You're asking questions to better learn what it is we're up to, right? So that's at the very beginning. Once you start creating any sort of materials, moderators guides, screener questionnaires, any sort of material, you're aligning, you're educating. Of course, once you actually start the research, you've already at this point invited them to sessions. Now you're reminding them, hey, everyone, just to remind you, we're starting sessions this week. Here's what we're going to be doing. Here's what we're aiming to learn. You're educating again and again and again. Of course, once research has started, maybe end of day, maybe end of sessions, you're sharing what you've learned. And again, you're educating. These were our research questions. We've conducted in-depth interviews for these reasons. Next up, we're going to be doing this other method. You're educating again and again and again. So they understand better what your job is, what you're doing, and the value you bring to the team. I've been on teams before where research was not a sophisticated program in the company, and people thought I just do surveys. That's what they thought UX research was. And I took it upon myself to educate. I didn't get defensive. I didn't say, oh, no, I do so much more. Maybe I thought that inside because we do, right? We do so much more than just surveys. That's just one of our many methods. But that was an indication to me that this team, that this group didn't know. It's not their fault that they didn't know, but they didn't know. They didn't know what I did. Not just in the company, I was new to the company, but they didn't know what I did as a professional, right? They didn't know what my job was, what my role was. They didn't know what any of us did. So I looked at it as another task. I need to educate them. So what I did in that case, instead of just verbally educating and assuming that would stick among these very, very busy people, what I did was invite them to a study, but a little different than inviting them to observe, which I also did later. But what I did instead was I invited them to be a participant. I literally sat them down and, these are people that I was developing relationships with. I had my stakeholder engagement, I had my relationships, but this was different. And I said to them, I'm putting on my researcher hat. Okay. I'm going to go into researcher mode now. Because I want you to feel what it's like to be in a research study. And then I went through the actual moderator's guide. I did everything as it is, as we would do with normal participants. And, when they asked me questions, when they looked at me and laughed, I, did what I would do with normal participants. Not there to make friends. I'm not there to laugh at my participants' jokes. You kind of keep a straight face and nod and say, for the sake of time, we're going to work on this right now, but I'd love to talk to you about that later. The same exact things we would do with participants, I did with them. So they could feel what it was like to be in a research study. So they could see what it was like to be in a research study. So they could understand what I did, what I do as a UX researcher. I don't just do surveys and I don't just do focus groups and I don't just sit and chat with my participants and laugh and giggle with them, right? Like I'm here to conduct real research and I wanted them to feel that, to know what that was like. And the response I got from them was amazing. Each and every single, I think there were 5 of them. It wasn't a huge team, so it wasn't a huge lift. But each of them was like, oh, this is what you do. And some went into more detail about how they felt being a participant and what it was like for them. And, it really was impactful. It was really influential in terms of them understanding what UX research is, what UX researchers do, and the value that I bring to an organization. So again, depending on your users, your audience, your stakeholders, figure out how to best communicate with them. And that is a way that you will influence, right? If they understand, like, oh, you're not just chit chatting, they see you're not introducing bias and just, having a grand old time. Like, no, this is a real thing. Some people don't know that. Some people don't. How many of you have had participants before in a research session where they go, oh, I could do this. This looks like fun. Sometimes people just see us having fun and they don't realize that, it's a real profession and we're real researchers working on real business problems. So do what you need to do to share that with your stakeholders and get them to understand what UX research is. Now, sometimes we have to change some things. Sometimes it could be team structure. Maybe your designer, your researcher, your content folks, maybe they're all operating in silos and you realize this isn't working. We actually need to bring these together. Maybe they're all reporting to different managers and you realize that is off because as they are reporting up, the managers have different objectives. So you might make a business decision to change the structure of these teams. We're now under one manager, one product team, whatever the organization is. Under that one manager, now you've got designers, researchers, content who work on things together. Because now they're all working on the same business problems with the same mentor, the same director, right? Like that might make more sense than reporting to different people. So I recommend being flexible. Now, depending on your role, you may not have a say in that, but if you are more senior, if you're a manager, if you are developing teams, I encourage you to keep that in mind. I've been on some teams where she's simply changing the team structure in that way led to greater efficiency, greater satisfaction, because people were working together now all the time instead of working in their silos and then coming together only at meeting time to discuss what they're working on. Right. But instead they were on the same team now and reporting to the same chain. So keep that in mind. Sometimes we need to change our team structure to be more effective. Sometimes we don't, and that's fine too, but the point is to be flexible in that way. The other thing I will mention is sometimes you need to bring in external experts. So if you have some senior stakeholders who, they complained about sample size and you brought in more participants. They said you're asking the wrong questions, you ask different questions. They said you're using the wrong methods, you use different methods. Now all of a sudden, over the past 6 months, you've talked to thousands of participants, thousands of users. You've had them do all sorts of things. You've asked them all sorts of questions and you're still not getting buy-in. You still have some super senior people who they don't believe you. We don't know why. Because they hired you because you're amazing and you know what you're doing. And you and I know that. But for some reason, super senior level person doesn't buy it. What do? Do you throw a tantrum? No. Do you get really mad? No. Do you get upset and sad? Maybe. Not for too long, though. Feel that? Like that sucks, right? It's kind of a form of rejection. Like you all hired me to do these amazing things, but now you're not trusting me. Like, yeah, that might feel bad. That's okay. Feel bad for a minute and then move on. You may need to bring in external experts. You may need to bring in external experts who you're going to pay a lot of money, not you, your company, okay? You're going to pay them a lot of money to say the exact same thing that you've said. But for some reason, that external expert, they're in the person who is not agreeing with your findings, they're in sync. That person, that CEO, that VP is listening to that external expert. Then it's totally fine. Look, if the company wants to spend money to bring in an external expert to say what you've been saying all along, totally fine. Don't be defensive about it. Like I said, it might hurt a little bit, just a little, and then move on, because the point is for us to do work and for people to consume our work. So if you think of it that way, right, then you don't need to be defensive. You're doing the best work possible and somebody else is saying it and change is occurring. The product is getting better. Well, that's our ultimate goal, is to make a better product. So it's okay I promise you that won't happen often. But if that does happen, don't let your ego get too bruised. It's okay to bring in external people to help you. It's really they're helping you, and if it's their mouth that's saying the things, that's okay. You needed some help. They're there to help you. Maybe you didn't need help doing the research, right? Like, because you're a kick-ass researcher and that's what they hired you for. You didn't need help doing that. You needed help communicating the findings, because back to sharing your findings in ways that make sense to your users, to your audience. This is just another mode, right? Whether it's sharing recordings, putting printouts up on the wall, sending memos internally, or bringing in an external person to speak the words, it doesn't matter. The goal is to people hear your work, hear what you have to say, hear your recommendations, so we can improve the product. Only good if people actually use it, and that is our goal here. Don't be defensive. Don't make it an us versus them, like they're not listening to me. Okay, they're not listening to me. How am I going to get them to listen to me? That now becomes your task. Like, this is a thing I need to overcome. I need to figure out how to get my message across, and that's totally fine. Top of the hour again. Our time flies by so quickly. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was useful to you. If you have other strategies you use to influence UX, please reach out to me. My list continues to grow. I've had different roles where I've had to do different things. Bringing in an external expert, that's happened once to me in my entire career. So I learn new things as I go along. If you've got other strategies, please do reach out. I also teach a longer workshop on strategies to influence UX, getting into nitty-gritty details about some of these things we covered here. So don't hesitate to reach out. Oh, also, I have some exciting news. These LinkedIn Live UX and coffee chats, I now have put on my website. They're on YouTube, and you can get there through my website. Check out on YouTube if you look for UXR Coach. You can find it, but then also from my website, uxrcoach.com. You can find a link to all of the past recordings there, and I will be sharing that on LinkedIn, so you can easily find that. If you're looking for it on LinkedIn, reach out anytime. If you want to talk about strategies, if you want to talk about other things UX related, reach out. Let's have some coffee together. And thanks for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Hopefully nobody's tuning in too late at night. If so, good night, sweet dreams, and I will see you all soon. See ya.